everybody! Today, Honey is going to continue reading Wayside School Get a Little Stranger, written by Louis Shacker and illustrated by Tim Holt. Chapter 22, Jane Smith. I found Jane Smith, Jason told Stephen the next morning when he got to school. You better tell Dee, said Stephen. They hurried across the playground. A whistle blew. No running, ordered Mr. Lewis, the professional playground supervisor. Now I want both of you to go back to the edge of the blacktop, then walk this time. The boys went back the way they came, then come back the way they went. Dee was sitting on a bench. She had been benched by Mr. Lewis for excessive noise-making. I found Jane Smith, Jason whispered as he walked past her. Dee and Jason entered the classroom together. Mrs. Dressel was seated behind her desk. As they passed in front of her, Dee stopped and said, "Did you have a nice time at the dentist yesterday, Jason?" "Yes, Dee," said Jason. "It was very nice." "I wonder if we have the same dentist," said Dee. "What is your dentist's name?" "Her name is Dr. Payne," said Jason, "but that it hasn't always been her name." "It hasn't?" asked Dee. "Oh, no," said Jason. "Before she was married, her name was Jane Smith." "Jane Smith?" asked Dee. "Is that spelled Janesmith? "Yes, that's how you spell Jane Smith," said Jason. "But like I said, that's not her name anymore. Her name is Dr. Payne. She works at the dentist's office at 124 Garden Street." They took their seats. Late that afternoon, Dr. Payne finished work and walked out of her office. It had been a good day. She had drilled 25 teeth. She made $60 for every tooth she drilled. 25 times $60 is $1,500. Not bad for a day's work. Of course, not all the teeth really had cavities, but how would any of her patients find out? She got into her fancy silver and black sports car and drove away. She sang along with the radio. She didn't even notice the old beat-up green station wagon in her rear view mirror. She lived in a mansion next to the lake. There was a stone wall around the house. She pressed a button in the car, then the iron gate opened. The gate closed behind her as she headed up the long and winding driveway. A moment later, the green old station wagon stopped and parked next to the gate. A woman got out, walked around the back, and opened the toll gate. She pulled out a letter. She set the letter up against the wall. Under her arm, she carried an old blue notebook. Dr. Payne's butler handed her a drink. The cook was making dinner. Dr. Payne's dog, cat, and husband were waiting for her in the den. Her dog's name was Bristles. Her cat's name was Sprout. She petted them both. Her husband's name was Sam. She petted him too. "Hi, darling. How was your day?" he asked. "I made $1,500, said Jane. They hugged and kissed. They loved each other, but they loved money even more. Then they had dinner by candlelight as they watched the sunset over the lake. After dinner, they sat out on the deck under the stars. Sprout lay purring on Jane's lap. Bristles sat faithfully by her side. Life was perfect. "I love you, darling," she said, petting Sprout. "And I love you," said Sham. "I was talking to the cat," said Jane. The butler stepped out onto the deck. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said, "but there's an elderly woman out on the yard." Jane's long fingernail dug into her cat's neck. "I wonder how she got past the gate," said Sham. "I don't know, sir," said the butler. "She's probably hungry. Perhaps I can give her some leftover. No, shouted Jane. Get rid of her. Let me have a look, said Sam. He followed the butler back into the house. He returned a moment later. Darling, you'll never guess who's here. One of your former teachers. Isn't that just the sweetest? Jane screamed. She jumped off her feet. Sprat flew up her lap and into the hot tub. What's wrong? Asked Sam. You idiot, shouted Jane. You told to get rid of her. She kicked the dog out of the way, then climbed over the railing and jumped off the deck to the ground, 15 feet below. Mrs. Jazil came out onto the deck. You can't get away from me, young lady, she hollered. Jane hurt her ankle pretty badly when she hit the ground. It was either sprained or broken. She lay on the ground in agony as she looked up at her former teacher. You have homework to do, said Mrs. Jazil, looking down at her. Jane's face twisted with pain. Rub a monkey's tummy, she shouted, then struggled to her feet. She had a suitcase stashed in the bathhouse, just in case this ever happened. She hopped in it and grabbed it, then limped down the lake, dragging her suitcase behind her. Mrs. Jazil hurried down the steps on the side of the deck. Jane groaned as she threw her suitcase into a motorboat. Then she pulled herself aboard and started the engine. Darling, come back! Shan shouted from the deck as she watched the boat sputter across the water. Mrs. Jazil climbed onto an old rowboat. I'll find you, Jane Smith, she shouted into the darkness. You can run, but you can't hide. Jane's voice echoed across the black water. Rub a monkey's tummy with your head. And another of them was he ever seen again. Wendy had 3 ears, I mean. She had 1 ear on each side of her head, just like most people. But she also had a 3rd ear, which lay flat on top of her head. You couldn't see it. It was completely covered by her thick, frizzy brown hair. She was an intelligent and lovely young woman. She was gentle and kind. At least she used to be. Then she married Xavier and became evil and wicked. But I'll get to that later. She lived in a small apartment in a big city. She always kept fresh flowers in the vase on the kitchen table. She didn't have any friends. She was afraid someone might find out about her ears. She was very embarrassed by it. The one top of her head, I mean. The other 2 ears pretty, as ears go. Actually, the 3rd ear wasn't ugly. In fact, it looked just like her other 2. It was quantity, not quality, that bothered her. Then she met Xavier. It was at a museum. They happened to be standing next to each other, looking at the same painting, the Mona Lisa. A girl stood by to make sure they didn't touch it. Xavier was very handsome, but he was frightfully shy. He was afraid of women. That's a beautiful painting, isn't it? Asked Wendy. Xavier blushed. He wanted to speak, but his mouth shut with fear. It took all his courage just to nod his head. But Wendy knew he liked her, because there was something else about her ear I haven't told you yet. The one top of her head, I mean. It didn't hear normal sounds. It heard people's brains. Wendy was able to listen to Xavier's secret thoughts, and this is what she heard. Yes, the painting is very beautiful, but you are more beautiful than the Mona Lisa. I wish somebody would paint your picture and I would buy it and look it all day. Alas, if I only had the courage to talk to you. Wendy didn't usually listen to other people's thoughts. She thought it was rude, even though the other people didn't know she was listening. Besides, most people's thoughts were usually boring. Xavier was getting too nervous standing next to her. He moved on to another painting. Wendy followed him. She listened to the lonely man's thoughts. They weren't boring at all. Most of his thoughts were about her. But she also learned a few other things. He liked to read. His favorite author was Charles Dickens. He loved the animals, especially dogs. That painting reminds me of a book, said Wendy, A Tale of Two Cities by Charles Dickens. Have you read it? Yes, Xavier blurted a little too loudly. It was my favorite book. I've read everything Dickens had written twice. My favorite part is when he suddenly stopped, very embarrassed. Please go on, said Wendy. No, I don't want to bother you, said Xavier. You're not bothering me, said Wendy. Charles Dickens is my favorite author, and I sometimes read aloud to my dog. You have a dog? Asked Xavier. Wendy nodded. Xavier stared into her dark eye. I love dogs, he said, as his brain said, I love you. Wendy and Xavier spent the afternoon together. He could hardly stop talking. It was like a genie had escaped from a bottle. All the love and emotion that had been buried for so long inside him came out pouring out on Wendy. I don't even know your name, he suddenly blurted. Wendy Nogard, said Wendy. I'm Xavier Dalton, said Xavier. They shook hands and made plans to meet again at the museum, but the following weeks. On her way home, Wendy stopped by the library and checked out A Tale of Two Cities. Then she went to the pet store and bought a dog. A month later, Xavier asked her to marry him. Wendy didn't know what to say. She loved Xavier, but she knew he loved her. But she didn't still have told him about the ear, the one on top of her head, I mean. He knew about the other two. He had nibbled on each of them. Marriage is a big step, she said. I'm afraid we haven't known each other long enough. I've known long enough to know I could never be happy without you, said Xavier. Before I met you, Wendy, I was sad and lonely, but I was used to it. Now I can't imagine living like that again. I don't know what I'd do without you. He stroked her hair. Well, that's one little thing you don't know about me, said Wendy. His hand bumped into it. What's this thing? He asked. That's what I was going to tell about you, dear, said Wendy. Xavier parted Wendy's hair and looked at it. It's an ear, he exclaimed. Yes, it is, said Wendy. Some people have 2 ears. I have 3. Now that you know, if you still want to marry me, my answer is yes. Yes, sweetheart, yes. I love you, said Xavier. That's all that matters to me. That was that he said, but this is what he was thinking. Oh, gross, you're disgusting. I never want to touch you again. I can't even stand to look at you. You tricked me, you freak, you monster. And of course, Wendy heard every word. He stood up. I'll be right back, sweetheart. I brought you diamond earrings and an engagement present. I just need to run back to the jewelry store and buy one more. He hurried out the door. She never saw him again. I'm sorry to say this story has a sad ending. Xavier, thanks to Wendy, got over his shyness. He went out with lots of women, but broke each one's heart. He could never love any of them. There was a hole in his heart. He was in love with Wendy Nogard, but he didn't know it, and so he could never be happy. Wendy became a bitter and evil person. She was unhappy, and she wanted everyone else to be unhappy too. Whenever she heard someone thinking happy thoughts, she would listen closely and then do and say the just right thing to make the person feel rotten. She hated children the most. Every time she passed the playground, she heard them laughing and having fun. So she became a substitute teacher. Chapter 24, Glum and Blah. Miss Norgard entered the classroom on the 30th story. She looked at all the bright and chipper faces. She knew by the end of the day they would be no longer be bright and chipper. They would be glum and blah. She smiled at the class. "Good morning, everybody," she said. "My name is Miss Norgard." She listened to their brains. Calvin has spilled orange juice on his lap during breakfast and worried that someone might think he had gone to the bathroom in his pants. Dana had gotten her hair cut yesterday, but she thought it was too short. She was afraid it made her look like a boy. She was especially sensitive to this because Dana was sometimes a boy's name. Jason was mad at his older brother, Justin. Justin was in high school. Justin always got good grades and was a star in everything he did. Compared to Justin, Jason felt like a loser. "What's so great about high school?" he had said after the morning. "My school is higher than yours." DJ had heard the song on the radio on the way to school. He hated that song, but it kept playing over and over again in his head. Phoebe had an itch on her leg. Miss Norgard smiled. The bad stuff always rolls on top of the brain. Even if a person was very excited about something wonderful, the person still worried about what could go wrong. Jenny was going horseback riding after school, and it didn't rain. She had never gone horseback riding before. She hoped she wouldn't fall off the horse. Miss Norgard clapped her hands. "So, who would like to tell me about what you've been working on?" she asked. A few hands went up in the air. "Ooh, ooh," said Mac. "How about the boy in the orange and purple shirt?" said Miss Norgard. Everyone looked around. "The handsome young man sitting right there," said Miss Norgard. Dana looked at her shirt. It was orange and purple. She pointed at herself and mouthed the word, "Me?" "Yes, you," said Miss Norgard. Dana's face turned red hot. "I'm a girl," she said. Everyone laughed. "Oh, I'm so embarrassed," said Miss Norgard, with her head over her hurt. "It's not your fault," said Dana. "It's my stupid haircut. I hate it." "Oh no," said Miss Norgard. "You look adorable. I see now you're a very pretty girl." "I'm ugly," muttered Dana. She buried her head under his arms. "I'd better call on someone else," said Miss Norgard. Suddenly, out of nowhere, a brave screamed, "Don't call on me! Whatever you do, please don't call on me!" It came from Benjamin Nashmet. "How about you?" said Miss Norgard, looking right at him. "Just don't ask my name," thought Benjamin. "I can never say my name in front of people." He took a breath to steady himself. "Well, we've been reading." "But first, tell me your name," said Miss Norgard sweetly. The muscles in Benjamin's face tightened. He concentrated real hard, then said, "Benjamin Nashmet." "I beg your pardon," said Miss Norgard. "Benjamin Nashmet," he repeated. "Henderson Schmidt?" asked Miss Norgard. Benjamin shied. "Benjamin Nashmet," he shouted. "I'm sorry," said Miss Norgard. "I have been distracted. What did you say?" Benjamin pressed his lips together. He tried to speak, but his mouth wouldn't open. "His name is Benjamin," said Jason. "Benjamin Nashmet." "Thank you," said Miss Norgard. "That's a very nice name, Benjamin. You shouldn't be ashamed of it." Benjamin covered his red face with his hands. He turned to Jason. "You look familiar. Do I know you?" "I don't think so," said Jason. She stared at him as she was trying to remember. "You're Justin, right?" "I'm Jason. Justin's my older brother." "So you're Justin's baby brother," said Miss Norgard. Everybody laughed. "I remember Justin. I substituted for his class once. He was the brightest teacher I ever taught." You must feel very lucky to have such an exceptional brother." His feet sting," thought Jason. For the rest of the day, Miss Norgard kept accidentally on purpose calling Jason Justin. One by one, she made every child in the class feel miserable. She called on Calvin to her desk and asked in a whisper that if he had to use the bathroom. Whenever she passed DJ, she hummed and the song stuck on his head. Whenever Bibi finally stopped thinking about her itch, Miss Nogard would walk by and scratch her own leg. It looks like it might rain, she said as she stared out of the window in the bright blue sky. Darn, I'll never get to the horseback riding, thought Jenny. I have a nephew who went horseback riding on a day like this, said Miss Nogard. There wasn't a cloud on the sky. Then suddenly, out of nowhere, it started thundering and lightning. It spooked the horse terribly. What happened to your nephew? Asked Jenny. Oh, he's fine, said Miss Nogard. He just broke both his arms and legs. He'll be in a cast for a year, but he has a very positive attitude. That's the important thing. Remember, always keep a positive attitude. By the end of the day, nobody had a positive attitude. The whole class was glum and blah. The children walked out of the school building heads down, except Jenny, who looked up at the sky, worrying about the weather, although she didn't know if she was worried about the rain or its sunshine. Even DJ was frowning. What's the matter? Asked Louis, the art teacher. Nothing, muttered DJ. I guess I just had a bad day. Don't you like your new teacher? Asked Louis. She's real nice, said Dana. It's not her fault I'm the ugliest girl in the world. I like her a lot, said Jason. It's my brother I hate. Me too, said Benjamin. I hate myself. Louis rubbed her upper lip. His mustache was beginning to grow back. What's her name? He asked. Miss Nogard, said Bibi, as she scratched the back of her leg raw. Are you sure? Asked Louis. Huh? Said Bibi. I mean, said Louis. Are you sure it's Miss Nogard, not Mrs. Nogard? I think, said Bibi. Why? Louis just shrugged.